Hi, and welcome to the Jade Rat. It's Shaya here, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Before we begin today's video, I'd like to thank everybody who's subscribed and liked and commented and even shared it, because it provides me with a lot of inspiration and motivation to continue making videos. And it's great, lovely, and really wonderful to connect with everybody all over the world. So thank you so much for that. Today, as you can see over here, we are currently doing a oil painting time-lapse video, and that is done in oils with a canvas in the 10-inch by 12-inch dimensions, which is about 25.4 by 30.5, I think, centimeters in dimensions. And really what I'd like to talk to you today is the inspiration for the subject of this painting, which is a knight, and the inspiration is drawn from my favorite protagonist trope. And it's really exciting to see that, you know, when you read a book or a story and you find a protagonist that you can really get behind and support, and you absolutely agree with their ideas, and that's what makes them my favorite. So this knight was actually inspired from my reading of Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, and I've read the first volume and I'll be beginning the second volume soon. And one of the greatest things that stood out to me in this book, in this novel, and it's historical, it's very old, it's got this old sort of language to it, and one of the greatest things that I noticed about it was this idea of nobility, honor, and this word that they use called worship. And worship is like what we would think is sort of devotion and prayer and very religious based, but in Le Morte d'Arthur they use the word worship as sort of like a character trait, and instead of saying, oh, that person is getting glory, they're actually getting worship. But it's a bit more noble than getting glory. Glory is sort of this selfish notion, but the knights in Le Morte d'Arthur, they go for worship, which is sort of to help others around you and increase your own personal reputation from that. But the takeaway is not to make yourself look good, but really to help others. And that's ultimately where the protagonist trope of the heroic leader comes in. And that's my favorite protagonist trope, because it's an ideal to strive towards. You can always look up to a leader, and you can always see how they act and how they behave and how they interact with other people in the community. And that makes it my favorite protagonist trope. And this is shown particularly by King Arthur, but also other knights as well, prominent knights that have a good deal of leadership among the Knights of the Round Table. So King Arthur, he's benevolent, but he won't be afraid to, you know, take up arms. And one of the most interesting things about him is that when he originally pulls the sword out of the stone, he's only a young boy. He's maybe 14, 15 years old. And he gets a lot of resistance, actually, because people, they don't believe that he's fit enough to be a leader, because he doesn't have that glory in battle. And as a result, he goes to prove himself, but he does so in a very interesting way. Of course, he fights with all of the kings and all of that, and there's a lot of war scenes in the book. But he's also very noble, and he's very willing to forgive, and is always very happy and jolly about, you know, being a king and people telling their stories and what happened to them, and he's very forgiving in that manner. And that's what I like, as in he's not afraid to get out there and do the dirty work himself. If he has to, he'll fight. Instead of telling others to do so, he'll go himself. If there's a tournament and you have to prove your worth, and sort of in a friendly way see which part of the UK is better in King Arthur's kingdom, he'll go out there and he'll prove himself too. And he won't just send others out. And that's what I liked about King Arthur. And this is also similar, but slightly different, to Beowulf. And I've only read the prose version of Beowulf. I haven't read the actual poem version. But the prose version, so this version, I think by Kirtland, is really interesting because he doesn't have this sort of leadership skill until later on in his life. And that's what makes it interesting, because at the start he serves under another liege lord, Beowulf, and he goes out to another country to help them, essentially because he wants to fight a monster. And it's not that he wants to do it to help the people, he wants to do it for glory. And in getting that glory, he wants to improve his own reputation and his strength and his skill as a warrior. But later on, as members of his family start to pass away, and he's suddenly pushed into this sort of leadership position among the Yeats, or Geats, I'm not sure about the pronunciation, but that group of people that Beowulf belongs to, he's sort of like a prince at the start and is just proving himself as warrior. But later on, he ultimately thinks about others and takes on this leadership role to go fight this dragon so that he can essentially save the other people that accompanied him. And of course there's people that run away or whatever, and there's one guy that he sacrifices himself for because it's the right thing to do. He's recognized that as a leader he must, go to the best of his ability and fight this dragon to ensure that the other generations can go on and move forward. And ultimately that's what I liked about Beowulf, in that he progressed from sort of this almost selfish sort of warrior to a leader that would be willing to put himself in front of others. And finally, there's another character that I'd like to relate this trope to, which is King Rama in the Ramayana. So it is a primarily Hindu composed epic, and it's significantly larger. It's about this wide and like this tall and that thick, and it's a massive tome, and it's, I think, 4 times the amount of verses than the Iliad and the Odyssey combined. So it's huge, but I've grown up with the story and I really like the protagonist of this story, aside from being a sort of religious figurehead, but as a character itself. And he was a prince who believed in upholding the virtue of a promise. So his father had made promises and that were not asked of at the time, but later on, as he was about to be crowned as king, someone cashed in on those promises made to his father, and as a result he was exiled for 14 years. And that's what's really interesting about it, is that he is a leader and he's a hero in his own right, but he understands the importance of leaving his kingdom so he can go out into the wilderness and essentially ultimately go and fight the greater evil that's in the world. And sure, he could have stayed in his kingdom and they could have had this whole argument about, I'm the oldest son, therefore I have the right. But what makes it truly heroic and what makes it truly as a leader is that he understands that he must leave in order to help the wider community. And he was a great warrior, so he would fight the demons and the monsters further than his own kingdom. So he would be protecting not only his own kingdom, and his brothers would protect the kingdom in his absence, but also he would go out and essentially sacrifice his own happiness and his own safety and, the comfort of his own bed and, living that royal lifestyle. And he sacrificed that in order to understand that there's a greater good that can be brought out of this exile. And that was really admirable. And every time we read books and we hear stories about this, leader that is a hero, it's one of my favorite tropes. And people say that it can be boring, but ultimately, as someone who likes to idealize figures as a means of self-improvement, I think this trope, the hero king, perhaps, or the hero leader, is the ideal that one can strive towards, particularly in this sort of modern day age where everybody's going on a juice cleanse or detox, and there's a greater focus on improving themselves. And I think that characters like King Arthur, or even Lancelot and Tristan, or King Rama from the Ramayana, and even characters like Superman, who's ultimately so powerful, but that has a good heart and is really altruistic, looks out for the community, is why he will essentially never go out of fashion. Other characters like Aragorn and even Faramir to a lesser extent in The Lord of the Rings are great examples of this, in that Aragorn doesn't want to become king, as he's comfortable with his life as a ranger, living away from the limelight, away from responsibility. But he knows that in order to save the world from the darkness that's coming in, he has to assume that role, so he sacrifices his personal happiness. And ultimately, it's not that bad of a sacrifice to essentially help everyone else and save the world. And that's what I think is the greatest examples of the heroic trope, and it's why I like to read, because books and fantasy are a sort of form of escapism. So if you have characters that are grounded in reality but also a little bit ideal, it's something that we as readers and viewers can work towards. So we can follow in King Rama's footsteps, and we can go, well, here sometimes we have to sacrifice for the greater good, but that doesn't mean that we can't have the joys of a simple life and all of the other things that are with it, because he does come back and he's a king. But ultimately, that's what makes him a hero, is that he understands the needs that he has to meet for others, and then he puts himself out there and helps everyone else. And in doing that, you create this strong community, and as a leader, you're someone that's looked up to, and further down the line, everybody will remember that as, the leader that helped us through or saved us, and that's how we can become better as people. So that's my favorite protagonist trope, and I think it's a great way to start off the escapist journey. And I had a great fun time talking to all of you today. Thank you so much. Once again, thank you to everybody who subscribed or liked or commented or shared. it really does mean a lot, and I have a great time reading them all and replying to them. And what else? You can find me, I'm on Goodreads as Jaya Sharma, so I'll write that down below. And I'm on Instagram as Jade Rat Art, separated by underscores. And I'm also, I have a Facebook page which is called Jade Rat Art Melbourne. I'll also put that in below if it gets difficult to remember. And finally, I have a website and a blog called The Jade Rat, which is separated by hyphens. And coming up soon, I'll be putting up some greeting cards made in watercolours for people to buy, primarily in Australia because of the shipping difficulties in sending overseas. But that'll be up soon, so stay tuned, and thank you so much. I think we've met the time limit, and have a good one. I'll see you guys next time.